And thank you. In advance of your getting started in your presentation, I do want to acknowledge the fact that for the nearly 2 years that I've been sitting on this commission, you have on a very regular basis brought concerns about this area of policing to our attention, and so I'm pleased to give you the opportunity to, in a formal setting, address this question. Thank you for being here.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Hamid Khan with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition.
I'm Jamie Garcia with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition.
So we are here today to speak about data-driven, evidence-based policing. But before we delve into our presentation, it's crucial that we unpack the title of this hearing itself. What it is essentially saying is that how data is turned into evidence. However, what we will show is how and where data is collected, which individuals and what communities are central to this data, and how presumption of guilt is turned into evidence or fact. So we ask that you keep in mind the spin that is being created by this very definition of the title. Yet in that process, we will see how race and racial profiling remains central to these programs, and in the process, how communities are pathologized, how they are demonized, and how they are criminalized, to make that jump from presumption to evidence to ultimately contain, control, and criminalize. The work of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition offers a deeply enriching and provocative understanding and analysis that exposes multiple layers of the national security police state. These tools of social control are deployed through many sectors, including social services, healthcare, housing, and employment. In essence, this enables a constant surveillance and policing of our bodies in every aspect of our lives. Communities of color, immigrants, and poor folks are the primary targets of these modes of surveillance. The Coalition's work does not take a top-down policy reform or recommendation approach, nor do we seek more transparency and oversight of policing, an institution that remains inherently violent and flawed by design. Instead, our work, rooted in the community, and our fight for abolition of policing takes us on a journey exposing the multiple tentacles of state violence, including the creation of the other, knowledge production, and the deep complicity of academia, corporate profit, and the deadly impact and trauma of programs such as predictive policing on our communities. This presentation is a call to action. Next, please. So let's just set the stage right away. What we have up front and center shows the mentality and the scholarship and the intent behind policy development and enforcement. Edwin Banfield was a social scientist and an academic at University of Chicago and Harvard University. This is a time when he wrote this book, The Unheavenly Cities. This is a time when the war on gangs, crime, and drugs was being unleashed. We all know the results, the devastating impact on Black and brown and poor communities. But Edward Banfield was also the intellectual and political mentor of James Q. Wilson, one of the co-creators of Broken Windows, along with George Kelly. And when you read what Edward Banfield is saying, and being an advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, that the implication that lower-class culture is pathological seems fully warranted. Rather than waste time and public money implementing policies based on the false notion that all men were created equal, better just to face facts and acknowledge that natural divisions exist. Members of the lower classes should leave school in 9th grade to get a jump on a lifetime of manual labor. The minimum wage should be repealed to encourage employers to create more jobs for low-value labor. The state should give intensive birth control guidance to incompetent poor, and the public should feel free to crack down on young, lower-class men. So you will see as we move through our slides that what we are saying, what it makes sense. The coalition grounds itself in certain principles. Our first principle is that what we are speaking about today is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history. Our second guiding value is that there is always an other that is created to justify these policies, an enemy that is created. Historically speaking, we talk about the multiple faces that have been paraded: the savage native, the criminal black, the illegal Latino, the manipulative Asian, the terrorist Muslim, the deviant women, and the deviant queer and trans bodies. So we have to ground ourselves in that history. Next guy. Then we also have to look at the history of policing itself, and what we see is going back to, because we cannot look at predictive policing today and data-driven without going back. We look at lantern laws back in the early 1700s. when in New York City, an enslaved body had to walk with a lantern to self-identify themselves as a threat if they were not accompanied by a master. The war on gangs. Well, there's much been spoken about broken windows. And then, of course, CompStat. CompStat is always paraded as this magic bullet. But I just want to go quickly about CompStat's basically recognized core components: timely and accurate information or intelligence, rapid deployment of resources, effective tactics, and relentless follow-up. We've seen the impact of CompStat. We've seen the impact of broken windows in Skid Row. We've seen how communities have been devastated and impacted all along. Next slide, please. Another piece we want to lift that really drives this kind of policing is intelligence-led policing. This is a concept that was imported from England that got started by the Kent Constabulary, and it's also known as a Kent model. But what's also interesting about intelligence-led policing is that from our vantage point, it's completely presumptive, but the two key elements of behavioral surveillance and data mining. How our behavior is constantly surveilled, how it's mined, how it's uploaded, so legitimizing presumptive policing. But what's key to intelligence-led policing is the third bullet point, that it's a process that involves planning outcomes an agency wants to achieve. And I think that's really the key, that everything when we talk about data-driven policing is an outcome that the agency wants to achieve, and we've seen the impact of those outcomes as well. Another seminal event that happened was, and of course we all know about 9/11, that the 9/11 Commission report identified that the events of 9/11 happened as a result of data not being shared. The data was not being shared amongst various agencies, and that's what led to the event of 9/11. But what happened was that after the 9/11 Commission report, Congress passed a law, Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act in 2004, and it did some really key things that shifted the infrastructure of data-driven evidence-based policing. One, it created a massive information sharing environment where information would flow horizontally, vertically, through local law enforcement agencies, federal agencies, international agencies, private corporation, public sector, private sector, so a massive sort of a hub and spoke system of information gathering. Secondly, it created the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which brought under its umbrella all the major intelligence agencies in the country. And thirdly, it created a definition of suspicious activity. And this is where the key starts. This is the foundation of where we are today. And the way they define suspicious activity, which is a part of LAPD Special Order 11, Special Order 1, now Special Order 17, it's defined in the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program that, and I quote, that it's observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of terrorist and/or criminal activity. So when you break it down, it's observed behavior, reasonably indicative. I'm watching somebody that indicates to me that they are thinking of doing something wrong, right? So this is what really gives rise to presumptive policing and when we talk about data-driven, evidence-based policing. It also led to the expansion of fusion centers. These are the central hub and spoke systems of information that moves through various systems. One of the largest ones is in Norwalk in East Los Angeles County. There's about 85 of those around the country. LAPD is one of the major partners of these fusion centers, along with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. This is what we have identified as LAPD's architecture of surveillance. Now, it includes various elements to that, human-based and electronic-based technology. Suspicious activity reporting program, iWatch program, predictive policing, and various forms of information technology where information is picked up. And we'll show you some photos. This is the digital receiver technology. Next one is Stingrays. Many people have heard of those. These are cell phone catchers that suck up your information from your cell phones. Next one is Trapwire. Trapwire is it is thermal imaging. Your body image is picked and uploaded into various databases. High-definition cameras installed in helicopters. Automatic license plate readers. We know the impact of automatic license plate readers. There are open lawsuits going on. Most recently, we were able to stop the installation of a whole periphery of license plate readers in Culver City. Drones, and we've had enough conversation about drones, and now increasingly what we saw in Chicago and various other municipalities, how drones are going to be used on spying on people. Body cameras, a tool for 24 hours of surveillance and information gathering. Freedom on the move. Many of you may have never even heard of that. This is right out of the battlefield of Afghanistan. This is used quite effectively into monitoring and scoping people out. Sometimes the LA Sheriff brings it out. This is something that is used during big protests and all that, and we've documented that on May Day 2017, that how they had this freedom on the move, tracking people and following the crowd as well. And this is just a process of how information is gathered and it's collected. We can move on. This is what we wanted to highlight is the massive information sharing environment, and we call it the stalker state. That when you look at this thing, and this is posted on our website, that you have the public sector, information moves from public sector to private sector to public sector, law enforcement agencies. So in essence, think about it in the context of a sanctuary city. Then when people are speaking about a sanctuary city, the vulnerability factors are not just only limited to LAPD picking up the phone and calling ICE. The vulnerability factors are the information that LAPD uploads into the information sharing environment. The vulnerability factors come in that how Vigilant Solution that has contracts with ICE also is a provider of automatic license plate readers as well. And we recently saw what happened with the Irvine Company, where 3 of their main malls, they were exposed that everybody that was going into these shopping centers, their license plate reader was being picked up by Vigilant Solution and in essence was being sent to ICE as well.
So we're going to hear a lot about data today, so we're going to dive into data. So data in the hands of LAPD is a biased weapon and will always be racialized and used to target Black, brown, and poor communities. Historically and currently, there exists an intention and a purpose by law enforcement to document certain acts by certain groups of people as criminal, thus creating crime data. As we historically know, and as we will currently show, law enforcement uses crime data to contain, control, and criminalize communities. As a result, Black, brown, and poor people who are more often represented in crime data are criminalized and incarcerated. Politically, this is tied to gentrification and the redevelopment of communities for the very few. We see this in the current political moment of the city, where housing remains an afterthought to the criminalization of homeless people. Data therefore becomes a weapon because people in their communities get quantified as the problem or the risk rather than the conditions they are living under, such as poverty, racism, and intentional neglect. Next slide. You will hear LAPD attempt to say their data is not biased. However, even scientists understand that all data collected has an inherent bias. Due to the institutionalized racism inherent in the policing system, intentional racialized targeting undoubtedly makes its way into crime data. Criminality, in fact, only gets assigned to certain people. LAPD's crime data is highly racialized, predominantly targeting the Black community. This is not a perception problem, but this is a fact. Reflected in LAPD's own data set, which is the latest data set we found with this type of specificity, compared to the white population, the Black community is 127% more likely to be frisked and 76% more likely to be searched. While compared to white population, the Black community is 24% less likely to have drugs and 37% less likely to have weapons. Let's look at more of LAP data taken from their own open source website. Looking at stops. Stops have not only increased significantly in the Black community, but the Black community is 5 times more likely to be stopped than white folks, as we see in 2017. Looking at arrests, next slide, yeah. Though LAPD will remark that arrests have gone down, however, the Black community is still 5 times more likely to be arrested than white folks. And if we dig a little bit deeper, as we have seen, by the work of Callie Lytle Hernandez and the $1 Million Hoods Project, arrests of houseless folks has also increased. Using LAPD arrest data from January 1st, 2012 to June 30th, 2017, Hernandez's report documents that LAPD arrests of houseless persons continue to climb even into the first 6 months of 2017. LAPD made 7,740 houseless arrests between January 1st and June 30th, 2017, pushing houseless arrests from 17.5% of total arrests in 2016 to 19.6% of total arrests during the first half of 2017. The Black community represents the majority of houseless arrests, 37%, and the majority of the houseless population, which is 43%. You will also hear LAPD claim that none of their data points include race data. However, many data points stand as a proxy for race. Let's look at the other data that LAPD uses to operationalize data-driven policing interventions. Looking at parole and probation data, in a multi-county study which included LA County and 11 other counties, the Black community made up 7.9% of that total population. Subsequently, the Black community made up 22.9% of all new parole cases between October 2011 to October 2015. This is how non-racialized data becomes a proxy for race. Gang identification is another data point that's found within LAPD data-driven programs. An audit of the Cal Gang database in 2016 identified 150,000 alleged gang members in California. Of those identified as gang members in Los Angeles, 30% are from the Black community, which makes up only 9% of LA City's population. Lastly, let's look at field interview cards, which are highly used in data-driven policing programs of LAPD. Unfortunately, at this moment, there's not much to say in regards to LA as of yet, because Deputy Chief Regina Scott really let us down. She told me personally she would have no problem running descent data for FI cards. However, she failed to respond to any of our emails dating back to July 6th until yesterday. Conveniently answering our email a day before this hearing, she told us that our request for descent race data of FI cards will have to be forwarded to LAPD Discovery Section. However, the community doesn't stop. We decided to look at other data from other cities to anticipate what we might see in LA. In Miami, of 60,000 stops, officers were twice as likely to fill out an FI card on a Black individual. In New Orleans, over 70,000 field interview cards were filled out over a one-year period, which resulted in an investigation by their Inspector General because it was feared the FI card was being used as a tool for surveillance of the city's population. Now we're going to look at how these data points that were discussed get operationalized into data-driven, evidence-based policing programs. Operation Laser, LA Strategic Extraction and Restoration, is a person-based predictive policing program. From one of the first reports written by Justice Security and Strategies, the consultant paid to institute the laser program, it claims the program to be analogous to laser-like surgery, where a surgeon uses modern technology to remove a tumor. That is how our communities are being referred to as tumors. Next slide. Laser creates a chronic offender list of people to track, trace, and surveil. 15 to 50 chronic offenders are created per division with backups similar to a quota system. Little to no ability exists to discover or contest being on the list, essentially making this a secret list. Laser also targets communities by creating laser zones. This is a map of 77th, Southwest, Southeast, and Newton Division. Within these zones are anchor points, which are homes, apartments, and businesses that LAPD claims are responsible for crime. LAPD intervenes at these anchor points by helping with evictions, serving abatement notices, or gentrifying the area. This effectively redlines the community, displacing people and/or making them homeless. In the process of choosing laser zones, in a report entitled Street Level Trends in Violent and Gun-Related Crimes in South LA, 2006 to 2015, Justice Security and Strategies analyzed crime trends in over 10,000 streets. Identified streets where crime occurred most, JSS compared those streets to census data. This identified Black female, head of household, who had lower owner-occupied housing as mostly residing on these streets. Just in the process of identifying the community and correlating them to crime trends, presumptively criminalizes them and their homes. Let's look at Laser's risk assessment and think back to the previous data points that I mentioned. To get on the list, LAPD uses arrest data, parole probation data, FI cards, and gang identification. So who is naturally going to be on this list? This is one of the chronic offender bulletins we received that we redacted. We are currently in conversation with the City Attorney's Office through our lawyers regarding the release of the chronic offender list. Lastly, let's quickly reflect on PredPol, another data-driven program. To start, I'm going to read a quote from co-creator Jeff Brantingham, who compares criminals to hunter-gatherers. Criminal offenders are essentially hunter-gatherers. They forage for opportunities to commit crimes. The behaviors that a hunter-gatherer uses to choose a wildebeest versus a gazelle are the same calculations a criminal uses to choose a Honda versus a Lexus. LAPD can talk all it wants about its mathematical model that incorporates past crimes with current crimes to create hotspots to patrol in, to prevent crime, but that makes no difference. What happens in the box is all that matters. Data-driven policing is just an extension of broken windows policing, which targets low-level offenses, criminalizing people and not their conditions they are living under. This is an image taken from Predictive manual that another organization named Lucy Parsons Lab received through a Freedom of Information Act request in Chicago. Predictive explicitly states to officers to engage in broken windows policing when they enter a hotspot. There are countless reports of the impact of broken windows on communities like Skid Row, its launching ground. 12,000 citations were issued within the first year of the Safer Cities Initiative, a broken windows policing tactic, also known as reset. We know broken windows theory is a discredited theory. Bernard Harcourt, a well-known critical theorist, states in his book, The Illusion of Order, broken windows is a theory that is conceptually flawed and results in aggressive detentions of tens of thousands of our fellow citizens. This style of policing leads to the violations of personal rights, and broken windows approach is really window dressing, and there are actually more profound processes of real estate development and wealth redistribution. Data-driven policing is nothing new. It is broken windows, it is gang databases, it's the redlining of communities, and it must be dismantled.
And in our closing, we have our demands, and our demands are that you cannot reform this, you cannot scale it back, you cannot tinker it. This has to be shut down. But what we have shown is how data is constructed, how criminality is assigned and state violence operationalized and deployed. But the deeper expose is the trajectory of how certain communities are thought of. We showed you Edward Banfield pathologizes and demonizes communities, we get broken windows. Jeff Ranthingham's underlying theme considers people savages, where whole communities become hotspots, we get Predpol. Craig Uchida compares people and communities to tumors that need to be surgically removed, and we get laser. This is the intellectual framework of your policy development and so-called public safety. To insult, to degrade, to dehumanize, resulting in displacement, banishment, incarceration, and murder. This must stop, and this must end now. But before we leave, we just want to say that you will hear from the department talk about that race is not a data point. You will hear from the department that this is about efficiency. You will hear about data is objective. You will hear computers are race neutral. You will hear crime has gone down. But what we have shown is that this is nothing more than what lantern laws were 300 years ago. This is nothing different than what broken windows has been, and this is nothing different than what gang injunction and the war on drugs has devastated our communities.
Thank you.